Hey YouTube, Dawson Ryder here with a little interesting video talking about the what would have been reboot for Power Rangers. Obviously right now we're in this kind of stage where we might be getting a new Disney Plus reboot with Hasbro, but that's still in the stages where we haven't heard very much and we're all kind of prepared for it to be canceled. But if you remember, of course, we had the old Netflix one that was with Johnathan Entwistle and Jenny Klein. And recently, Johnathan Entwistle did a Reddit AMA, I think in promotion for the new Karate Kid movie that's coming out, the Legacies one. That poster reminds me of the 22 Jump Street post-credit scene where they had like Jump Street Legacies. But anyway, he did an AMA and someone asked him about what his Power Rangers reboot would have looked like, and I wanted to just take a look at that because I thought it would be fun to talk about like what could have been. So I'm going to read some sort of snippets from it. From as early as 2018, I had created an entire new universe for Power Rangers, kind of a multiverse. It was fashionable back then, because of course now we know it's fashionable to let everyone know you're part of the groupthink and you hate the multiverse. I wasn't doing mmpr specifically, but Tommy Oliver was at the center of the world. All the mythology was surrounding him being one of the most important people in the universe, because we all know what he would become. So it was basically a time-bending, huge story about stopping Drakkon from taking over everything. The TV series had a kind of King Arthur vibe, more mythical and magical, and then they talk about Jenny Klein also working on that, and he would have loved to make it a reality. So this is interesting because it does line up with a couple of the rumors we had. We know we'd have several iterations of rumors about this. I remember we also had the leaked script about the movie they were working on that had time travel. This kind of reminds me of that in the sense that obviously it involves the time travel or multiverse or something, but just in the sense that it feels like something I would like. I think it actually would be pretty cool, like whether it was a comic or a show or a cartoon, whatever. I like this idea. I think there's some cool stuff here. Same thing with that multiverse thing. It sounded kind of messy, the movie scripts, but I thought it would have been cool to see as a fan. But I think it's kind of a bad idea to start big. You don't do the multiverse season 1. You do it season 2 when you bring in Earth 2 and Zoom. I would have liked to have seen that. I just think it's a little bit of like a mess to start off so quickly. It is interesting, the idea that they were going to use Drakkon though. Obviously this wouldn't have been JDF Tommy because this would have been after his passing, and I think this was stuff that was worked on after his passing because we had that rumor that the main character was going to be named Tommy. He was going to be the leader as Green Ranger, and then we were going to have him turn evil, and then Red was going to take over and we'd have a female lead for Red. And I liked that idea. I liked the idea actually of the reboot having Green Ranger as leader. Not because of like, oh my god, the Green Ranger is the best, but I liked the idea for some reason of the new reboot, whether it was this one or the next one or the one after that or whatever, having a new color as leader. I just kind of liked the idea of that fresh start and unique identity. Of course, the fans' minds were closed to it. Like, you know, in general, fans can be pretty closed-minded individuals, but this is such a trivial thing to be closed-minded about. Like, I can get it to a degree if you get upset or annoyed or mixed feelings about a change to the mythology or the story, but a color swap? You couldn't accept a color swap? My god. But anyway, I thought that would have been cool. And I thought it would have been kind of a cool way to pay tribute to Tommy. I think you probably would have run into some mixed territory of people complaining about having everything revolve around Tommy. And I would kind of agree with that depending on how it turned out. But I do like the idea of them just naming a character after him sort of in tribute. I think that would have been kind of nice. But it's definitely interesting. And it sounds like they would have maybe had Drakkon be perma-evil? I don't know, because we don't have a lot of details, but I'm curious whether it would have been like Drakkon in the comics, where you kind of have your cake and eat it too, where you introduce the multiverse to have a version of Tommy that's always evil, and then our Tommy, the new reboot Tommy, would have stayed good. Or would you have had the reboot Tommy become Drakkon? I think that actually would have been kind of cool, have a Tommy that just permanently turns evil and there's no multiverse element to that, and you start off with your lead character and then he becomes the big bad of the series, and that could have been kind of neat. But like I said, I think it would have been interesting to see, but maybe too much of a mess to start off so big. I think you want to start off a little bit smaller scale with stuff like that. And obviously this would have borrowed heavily from mmpr. Just like I think even though they said it's not supposed to be mmpr for the new one with Disney, I think there's going to be some elements borrowed from it for the sake of familiarity. It's also interesting because I've thought a lot about the Drakkon stuff because I think the comics did the best in terms of more mainstream audiences that read comics or are willing to read comics during Drakkon and Shattered Grid, because I think that's a thing that a lot of people caught because, you know, it made news, like IGN and whatever reported like, oh my god, there's this cool Green White Ranger hybrid. And I always thought that there was probably a narrow window that is maybe closed now, I think is closed now, where they could have capitalized on MMPR's popularity and nostalgia, kind of like in the Cobra Kai way I'm talking about, but whether it be them doing a Netflix movie or series where you get the cast back like Once and Always and do live action Drakkon, I think if you did that really well, that actually could have been pretty successful because you would have capitalized on the older fans, the casual older fans, not the echo chamber of the fandom, but that would have been excited by that. The problem you run into with that in comparison to something like Cobra Kai is that, you know, PR doesn't really have actual actors for a lot of the cast compared to Cobra Kai, so it wouldn't have felt, I don't think, as impactful as Cobra Kai. But also, like, an animated series could be cool. You know, I've gone on record as saying if we do an animated series, I don't want to see them adapt the comics because I don't know why our only ideas for shows is adapting something. Like, let's just write something from scratch. But I would love to see, like, a movie or a mini series based on the comics, like they do for the DC animated movies, but not like for the main thing. But I think that could have been cool too. You get like a Voltron style animation and do the Drakkon story or version of it. I think you had a window of time where you capitalized on MMPR's nostalgia popularity, because you're eventually going to run out of people that care about MMPR. You know, the core hardcore fan base is already whining about it, but the casual fans that grew up with it are going to just gradually not care, and eventually we're going to get to a place where you're just going to have those small pockets of people that grew up with Samurai or Ninja Storm or whatever, and then just the general public thinking of MMPR when they think Power Rangers, because that's kind of the brand, you know, iconography that you use. And there's not going to be a lot of general interest if they were to try to bring back a nostalgia project. Our best hope is almost to just wait for PR to be completely forgotten and then it to come out with something and it almost seems like a new idea. Like, this is a weird example and not at all comparable in a way, but that movie Fall Guy or Free Guy, no, Free Guy's a different movie. There's too many movies that sound the same. I think it was Fall Guy with Ryan Gosling, really funny movie. I didn't even know that was based off of a show. Like, I would be kind of cool almost to wait 10 years and to have Power Rangers catch on a new generation that doesn't have any of the baggage of the fans and MMPR and Sentai, but I don't think that would happen, but it just kind of reminded me of that situation. Anyway, I got off topic with the ramble, but that's why it's called Rambles. I think this was interesting. I think there would have been some cool ideas here. You know, it's a shame how long that was in development hell. I mean, he said since 2018, that's kind of crazy how long they were working on that. This is one of those situations where I would love to see like just a book released or a documentary about all the iterations they would have had, because there's undoubtedly probably at least, I would say, 3 to 4 versions, because I think this version sounds like what was worked on after JDF's death, because I don't think they were necessarily going to have it centering on Tommy before that. They might have had an element, but I think they were kind of inspired by the idea of paying tribute to him and capitalizing on his popularity. Again, I feel like it would have been something that I would have liked as a fan and would have been really interesting since we know, but it maybe would have been a little bit too messy right out the gate to do Drakkon and Multiverse stuff. However, I don't mind the idea in general of them using Drakkon if you do some sort of Tommy storyline, even if it's not necessarily Tommy or if it's inspired by the idea of Drakkon. But I like the idea of if we do a reboot and instead of doing a Rita or a Zed inspired character, you have Drakkon there in the Rogues Gallery. I think that would have been interesting, and it's kind of cool to think that they were thinking of stuff from the comic to put in the show. So yeah, just something to think about. I thought it was really interesting, and I like to sort of peer into these what-if versions of what we could have gotten. Really curious to see what this new reboot will be like if it ever sees the light of day. But what do you think of this? Would it have been something you would have liked to have seen? Let me know in the comments as always. Until next time, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and climb the steps and ring that bell to get notifications for all my videos. Dawson Ryder, signing out.